Hi, Tara Whitney from Whitney Consulting. We write grants, tenders, and business cases. And I'm doing a video today for you about what happens when you get the grant. So, what happens when you get a letter to say that you've been successful in your grant application? What's next? So, the next thing that happens is a grant agreement. So, there'll be some form of formal agreement which defines exactly what you've said you will do. And all the rules and responsibilities around that. So it will talk about how you are to report back to the funding body, if there's any requirements around what you do in terms of acknowledging the funding body, all of that sort of information, how much you will get, what they will give you, and the payment schedule. So whether it's all up front or all at the end or in sort of increments. All of that information will be contained in the funding agreement. So you need to read that agreement very carefully before you sign it to make sure that you can comply with it. So if you can't comply with it, you may have to pay the money back, which is very problematic if you've already spent it. So make sure you have a read of that funding agreement and really understand what they're asking you to do and what you have to do in terms of reporting and acquittals. Because if you look at that agreement a year down the track when you finished your project and you haven't considered it the whole time before that while you've been delivering your project, you haven't kept any records or anything like that, it is going to make the final report, the acquittal, very, very difficult for you to do. So that's the first thing that will happen is you'll negotiate a funding agreement with the funding body and you'll both sign that and you both have a copy which says the funding body will do this, they will provide you this money at this time or on this milestone date, and you will do this, you will do the project, and this is how it will be governed. Then you will need to report to them. So as I said, the actual technicalities and the how and when about the reporting will be defined in that funding agreement, and it does vary between grants. But generally there'll be some form of reporting required along the way. It depends on the size of the grant, obviously. If it's a small amount, they may not require any reports until you've finished. It might just be one final little report at the end. But if it's a reasonable amount of money, they may require reports along the way. And the reports will be, again, it will depend entirely on the organisation giving you the money and how much money you're getting. They can include quite a bit of information about how much you've spent that quarter or that time in that time period, what you've done, any issues that came up and how you dealt with them, all of that sort of information. Any lessons learned, all of that. Or that could be very, very simple and just ask you for a bit of a status update and how much money you have spent and whether you're on track. It does depend. There will be a template normally for the bigger types of reports. You'll be asked to fill out a template. So you just fill out and answer all the questions. If you have any problems with filling out the report, you just ask the funding body. The most important thing about once you've got the grant funding and you're delivering your project is to keep in touch with the funding body. If you have any questions or concerns throughout, contact them. So for example, if it looks like you're going to underspend, you're not going to spend all of the money, speak to your funding body and talk to them about whether or not there's some scope there to increase the impact of your grant. Generally, with underspend, the funding body doesn't want the money back. They don't want to have given you money and then have to go through the rigmarole of getting it back. What they want is even more outcomes. So if you're delivering a great project, is there some way you can make it even better because you've managed to get in under budget? So have a talk to them, see what ways. I would come up with a way beforehand, before speaking to them. I would look at it and go, well, actually, we could expand our project in this way and it would be awesome. Come up with a proposal and then speak to the funding body and say, look, it looks like we're going to underspend. This is what we would really like to do with the money. Can we get approval to do that? They may say no. They may say that you need to return the money, but you do need to speak to them first because you do not want to get into the situation of spending the money that is underspent or would have been underspent and then being told, no, that's not an approved use of the funds. You need to pay that back. There is also the situation where a project will go over budget. Now, in that situation, you will not get any more money from the funding body. You should have in your application provided quotes. You should have done enough work beforehand to get pretty close to the budget. You shouldn't have, you should have a bit of contingency, a bit of wiggle room, some quotes so that you shouldn't go way over budget. That's what your project management should be doing, your governance should be doing, checking along the way to make sure, well, we said we're going to spend 5,000 on this particular thing and we've spent 6. So we need to pull back in some other area. You should be doing that all along the way to make sure you don't overspend, because you won't get any more money out of the funding body. Any overspend you will have to pay for. So if you have said you're going to deliver this project for the amount of money from the grant funding body, you must deliver that project. You can't get halfway through and say, oh, we're not going to have enough money to finish. You have to finish. You have said you will. If you don't finish, you have to pay the money back potentially, because you have said that you will deliver this project for that amount of money. So be very sure when you are asking for a certain amount of money and committing to deliver the project that you can deliver the project for that money, or you will be up for any overspend that does occur. So the next thing to talk about is how to track that. How do you do that? The best way to do it is to have a separate bank account or a separate cost code if you have that for your grant money. That is the absolute easiest way for you to be able to track your money that coming in from the grant funding, to be able to report back to them. If you have a separate bank account for just that grant funding money, it makes life so much easier when you're asked to report and say how much of that grant funding money you've spent, or where it got spent, because it's all there. So that is one tip that I would give you. If you can, have a separate bank account for the grant funding money. If you can't, then you need to track it somehow, whether that's in a spreadsheet or through your accounting system. Whatever your organisation uses, you need to track that grant money and what that grant money was actually spent on and when. So part of the reason for that is as I said, the reports, and there will always be a final report or an acquittal at the end. You do not want to get into the situation where you get to the end of the project and you haven't kept any records. So ask the funding body. They should probably provide it up front, but if they haven't, ask them for the final report template at the beginning of your project when you first get the grant money, because you'll be able to have a look and see what they're asking you to report on. And then you can make sure you track that information from the very beginning before you've even started. So if they're asking you to report on certain things like how many people you hire throughout the project, it's very hard to do that once you finish the project. You have to go back through all of your expenditure, back through all of your records and go, okay, well, we had a bricklayer here and we had this person hired here to do this and this to do that. It makes it much harder. Whereas if you know at the beginning that that's what you're going to have to report on, as you go through the project, you can keep a spreadsheet or keep some sort of a document that records, we engage this person for this many hours of work, or this type of work. So do that at the very beginning of the project, and it will make your life a lot easier when it gets to acquittal stage. Now, we do help with acquittals, so if you have a really big acquittal or you haven't actually recorded along the way and you need some assistance getting that acquittal done, Whitney Consulting can help you with writing up your acquittal. They're very important because if you don't do it, you won't get money from that funding body again. You will be recorded as somebody that was not compliant, and you may not then get any more funding out of that funding body. And also in many cases, some of the money will be withheld until you have provided that final acquittal or final report. So you may actually not get the money if you don't submit that report, and it has to be compliant. So we do help. If you need our help, you can contact me on tara@whitneyconsulting.com.au. It's WHITNEY, or go to the website whitneyconsulting.com.au. So I hope that helps you to understand a bit about what happens when you get the grant funding. As I said before, one key tip is make sure you communicate with your funding body. They are not going to bite. They want to help you deliver the project successfully. If you don't know if you're allowed to do something, ask before you do it. It is much better to ask than to do it and find out that wasn't going to be okay, and now you're up for providing the funding back or something like that. Keep an open communication with them. Let them know what you're doing, any issues you have. Let them know throughout as you go along, and they will be much more comfortable to know that you're trying to do the right thing. Hope that helps, and send through any questions that you've got and I'll do a video up for you. Thanks a lot. Bye.